Hi folks, this is Lee W. Mowen, the host of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. I've been hosting my podcast on Anchor for some time now, and let me tell you why it's the easiest way to make a podcast. When you host with Anchor, you have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or phone. Anchor then distributes your podcast for you so others can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more platforms. You can even make some money with your podcast with no minimum listenership required. And best of all, it's 100% free. It truly is the one-stop shop for those looking to start a podcast. To start, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor. On episode 149 of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, our special guest is Don Helbig, a man of Cincinnati hockey history, and also the public relations manager for Kings Island and the former broadcasting voice of many Cincinnati hockey teams. We're talking the Queen City, great moments in local hockey history, one impressive record broken, and more on episode 149. Welcome to the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mowen. This is a weekly podcast covering all sports in Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio. From Lima to the Ohio River and northern Kentucky, from eastern Indiana to Madison County and all points in between, this is your source of local Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio sports. Visit the leewmowen.com/podcasts to find your favorite podcasting platform. Music created with the Splash app. Time for another episode with your host, Lee W. Mowen. Here on episode 149 of the Cincinnati Dayton Sports Podcast, and we have Don Helbig as our special guest. Don, good afternoon, and how fares everything?
It's going as well as it could, based on the, the situation we're all in. But, you just take it day by day and just do what you can.
And a little bit of history. Don and I were co-voices of the Cincinnati Thunder junior hockey team when they made the move up to South Metro Sports. Don was the number one play-by-play guy. I was the number two. That's how Don and I know each other. And
well, let's not refer to yourself as number two, because I think, if you asked a lot of the people that were listening to the games, they would have said you were the guy they would have probably preferred to listen to.
No, I mean, Don, you've been a voice of so many hockey teams, and I hope to get to all of them that you've covered. So let's begin. Where are you from?
Originally Deer Park, Ohio. So, lived there till I was about 5 or 6, then moved out into what's called Anderson Township.
Okay.
Grew up there and, pretty much lived in Cincinnati most of my life. I've had a couple of, times where I moved away. I lived in Louisville, Kentucky in the late 80s, and then came back to Cincinnati, started working with the Cincinnati Cyclones in 1990. And then, I've lived in Greensboro, North Carolina, Albany, New York. But each time that I've left and gone away, I always found my way back here to Cincinnati.
I was about to ask, when did you know you wanted to be a broadcaster of hockey?
1972. I was Cincinnati Swords of the American Hockey League. We're playing at the Cincinnati Gardens. Went to my first game that year in November. I was instantly hooked on the sport. Started listening to the games on the radio. Ken Wilson was the voice of the Swords. He went on to do the St. Louis Blues. Did them for 20 years. Later on, did the Phoenix Coyotes for a little bit. But that's when I kind of thought that would be the thing to do, because I knew, being an American and, just not growing up with a lot of ice around Cincinnati. I mean, there was no chance that I was going to ever play hockey. That would have been the ideal dream, to be a pro hockey player. But the next closest thing would have been broadcasting. So that was kind of the goal, to broadcast hockey. And I really wanted to do it in the American Hockey League. Everybody wanted to do it in the NHL. But for me, the AHL was my introduction to hockey, and I love that league. And I was fortunate enough to not only get to do it, but get to do it for a team here in Cincinnati with the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks.
And I know I definitely want to talk about the Mighty Ducks. I remember the radio commercials and Cincinnati radio when I was a kid, and I mean those were some great teams at the Gardens. My next question is, how many teams were you the voice of?
I did a little bit of color with the Cincinnati Cyclones. We had Terry Ficcarelli was the voice of the team when I was working for them, and then with the Carolina Monarchs, did helped out with the weekly radio show that they had. But in terms of the actual play-by-play voice, it would have been the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks and the Albany River Rats.
How did the Mighty Ducks and the River Rats situation come to be?
Well, with the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks, I was working for the Carolina Monarchs, and in fact, there had been talk about broadcasting the games the next year, but the Hartford Whalers moved to Greensboro, and the Monarchs got evicted from their lease at the Greensboro Coliseum. So I needed to go somewhere else, and I started looking around, and around that same time, the Baltimore Bandits of the American Hockey League, they were looking for a new place to go. The Cincinnati Cyclones had vacated Cincinnati Gardens. Gardens needed a tenant. So it all came together that way, where the Baltimore franchise was purchased by the Gardens, and they had Anaheim as the NHL affiliate and took on the Mighty Ducks name. So it was an opportunity to come back home, and it was an opportunity to work with the Anaheim organization. I had met some of them, the GM Jack Ferrara and assistant GM David McNabb. They would come to Greensboro when the Bandits would play. So I was able to, know who I was going to be getting involved with. They seemed like really good people, and it seemed like the right fit at the time.
Wasn't the Mighty Ducks also affiliated with Detroit for a little bit?
There was a time, yeah. There was 3 seasons where there was the dual affiliation, and Detroit would send 8 to 10 players, and it was interesting to see, because there was a different way of what the two organizations were trying to do in terms of the type of players that they were drafting. But the coaching staff, they made it work. The first year was 1999. The 99-2000 season, Mo Mantha was the coach. And then the next 2 years with the Detroit-Anaheim split, it was Mike Babcock coaching the team. And, but it was just interesting working with both organizations. And Detroit, Ken Holland was the general manager. He's now in Edmonton. Jim Nill was the assistant GM. We would see him a lot. And he's now the GM in Dallas. And they were just terrific people, along with the Anaheim group. So it was, it worked out because both organizations, really worked well together. And a lot of times when you had those dual affiliations, it didn't work out very well.
I mean, that's going to be tough balancing, not only just the one, but 2 of them as well, sending, athletes to either the Red Wings or the Mighty Ducks at the time.
Yeah, and there, sometimes, you get 1 or 2 call-ups by your parent club, and that kind of hurts. But you could have, there were situations where in 1 week, Detroit needed to call up 2 guys due to injuries, and Anaheim had to call up 2 guys, and now you're 4 guys short. So, that kind of, kept it from being as good as the team on paper, looked like when you looked at the roster. It was like, this is going to be a really good team. But just because, you were getting calls from 2 different teams, and they were always, obviously taking your best players, so it was kind of hard to field a competitive team. But, it was just one of those things, again, there's some tremendous talent that came through, both for Detroit. Yuri Fisher was one of the players that came in from Detroit. He was one of the best players I ever saw, in the American Hockey League. And, from Anaheim, Ryan Getzlaf, came through at the end of one of the seasons, joined the team for the playoffs. You had Corey Perry, came through, and Andy McDonald was another player, had a, pretty long NHL career. So just a lot of talent. And, it was just, to me, it was always unbelievable how good the talent level was, not only on the Mighty Ducks, but just through the American Hockey League, and how few people in Cincinnati, number 1, knew about it, or number 2, appreciated it.
And that's sad, too, because the AHL's the top step before you get to the big show in the NHL. And just thinking that you were in such a historic hockey rink and you get to see pretty much the stars of tomorrow in Cincinnati, that's a little sad.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it was the one thing that I always felt that was missed during the Mighty Ducks years, was just, having that opportunity to see a lot of these guys that were going to go on to not only play in the NHL, but play very well and become key players on their teams, and you could see the visiting teams, come in, and there would be number 1, draft picks on the rosters, and the talent level was phenomenal. And, these players were 20, 21, 22. So, they were just beginning their careers, and it was a great league for them to develop their talent, but an opportunity for fans to really, watch these players before they went on to the NHL. But it just seemed like here in Cincinnati, they wanted, They were more about, having their fan favorites and players that were going to make their homes in Cincinnati. And I think some of them, they kind of took it the wrong way, that the players wanted to get out of Cincinnati because the idea was to get to the NHL. So it was just hard, it was hard to get the fans to really stay connected with the team, because they were used to, with the Cincinnati Cyclones in the IHL, they could retain players and have those players year after year.
And that's a shame too, because the players don't necessarily want out of the town because they don't like Cincinnati. They want to play at the highest level possible, and Cincinnati.
They do. They do. And what's interesting about that is, and it just straight to your point about Cincinnati being a great town, a lot of these players that went on to play in the NHL, they now live here in Cincinnati. So they've made it their home. So when they were here, they loved it. They loved the people, but it just wasn't the NHL where they wanted to be.
There was a former NHLer that lived in Cincinnati. I don't know if he still does. Blaine Stockton. He was the head coach at Sycamore for a year or two.
Yeah, Blaine Stockton still does live in Cincinnati. Keep in touch with Blaine. He was with the Cincinnati Stingers back in the mid '70s when I was a season ticket holder with the to the Stingers, and he's one of only two players that ever scored 50 goals in both the WHA and the NHL, with Bobby Hall being the other one. So that's pretty good company there for Blaine. But it was kind of neat for me. I was working for the Cincinnati Cyclones at the time, and here I am as a teenager watching the Stingers, and I have all these favorite players. And then 1991, Blaine comes in as an assistant coach. Now I'm on bus trips and talking to the guy down the coach's office with them all the time. So that was kind of surreal for me to see these play. And then they would be, a lot of the players were scouts too that I had watched growing up. So to see all these players from my childhood, now working on the management side, and then crossing paths with all of them during my hockey days, that was something that was always interesting to me.
Now, the Mighty Ducks eventually took off and left the Cincinnati Gardens, but I don't know how many people knew that there were plans to try to bring in another team in the Rail Raiders, or Rail Riders, one of the two.
Yeah, the Rail Raiders, there was. It was the same, the franchise was owned by the Gardens. What happened with the Mighty Ducks is there were teams in Louisville and Lexington in the American Hockey League. As soon as they left the league, the Mighty Ducks were on the clock because the travel cost just skyrocketed. Oh, yeah. There were no longer the overnight trips or the day trips where you could leave at 4:00, go play the game, you're back home by midnight. So that there were 12 of those trips a year between those two cities, and so the cost of operation really skyrocketed at that point. And when you're flying to these different places, it's great for the players that you're flying, but from Anaheim's point of view, they were no longer able to have as much practice time as players in other cities were getting. If you look at, when there were cities like Albany and Lowell and Providence and Hartford and, Syracuse, all those cities where, their road trips are like 2 hours, 3 hour road trips, they can come back the next morning. They can be on the ice at 10 o'clock. Well, when you're leaving and you're playing in Milwaukee and you get back at, 5 or 6 a.m. from a game, you can't practice at 10 o'clock. You can't practice that day. So the practice time wasn't there. So being a development league, practice a huge part of that. And for Anaheim, for hockey reasons, they needed to look to go somewhere else. And they found a deal in Portland, and then when I was in Albany the next year, I saw a lot of these players that had played in Cincinnati were on the Portland team. And they all told me hockey-wise it was better for them because they got lots of rest, lots of practice time. But they really missed Cincinnati because the city wasn't as good. But that's why the Mighty Ducks left, and it was tough to get another NHL affiliate because the same situation was going to be there, not enough practice time. So, although there was interest, we were trying to sell season tickets. We had taken deposits, and we needed to have 2,000 season ticket holders, and, we got to around that 1,500 range, but time ran out. The NHL teams, the ones that were looking for different places to go, they'd all, committed elsewhere before we could commit to having that 2,000 season tickets that we needed financially to make it work to where we could fly to more places. And it wasn't always going to be, 6-hour bus drives to, rides to Milwaukee.
So after the Mighty Ducks and the Rail Raiders, what was your next stop?
My next stop was the Albany Riverettes in the American Hockey League. I wanted to stay in the American League if I could, and I was fortunate to be able to do that. And I got into another situation where there was the dual affiliation. We had Colorado and we had the Carolina Hurricanes were there. So, for me, it was kind of getting reacquainted with the people that booted me out of Greensboro with the Whalers, the former Whalers there. But the Carolina, group was, another, really first-class organization. Jim Rutherford was the general manager. He's now in Pittsburgh. Tom Rowe was our head coach. He's now coaching over in Russia. And, we had some pretty good players, come through. And, I really enjoyed my year there. And media-wise, it was almost like an NHL setup for me, where we had 3 newspapers that covered the team on a daily basis. So every practice, the beat writers were there. After the games, the 4 TV stations would get the post-game interviews. And so it was as close as you could get, and even better than a lot of NHL cities in terms of how often the media was around the team. So I enjoyed it from that perspective.
How did you wind up back to Cincinnati and wind up with the Cincinnati Thunder?
I was working, with the River Rats. That the Albany ownership also owned an arena football team. It was the Albany Conquest. So we were on a road trip, and it was in Florida. And I'm sitting at the hotel, down by the pool, getting ready to, head over to the arena for the game. And my phone rings, and it's a guy named Bill Meffert, who had been the marketing PR manager at Kings Island in the 1980s for several years, and he was kind of doing some consulting work with them, working 2 or 3 days a week. And he called me up, and he just said, "Hey, just wanted to run something by you. There's an opening for a PR manager here. Would you be interested in talking to us about it?" Well, I, grown up going to Kings Island and had done a lot of fun things on the roller coasters and that there in the 1980s. And I'd always, outside of sports, the other thing I always wanted to try was to be a PR person in the, amusement theme park industry, So, I told Bill that, I'd certainly be interested in talking about it, but it was one of those things for me. I liked what I was doing with the River Rats. I was treated really well there by both ownership, the staff, and the fans, so I wasn't in a hurry to go anywhere. My wife and daughter, liked the city. My daughter absolutely loved her school, that she was at. So there wasn't any urgency to get back to Cincinnati, but I looked at it as a nothing ventured, nothing gained type of scenario. So I came back into town. It was Father's Day weekend, and interviewed for the job. And a couple of days later, they called up and said, "We'd like to offer it to you." So, having with pro hockey, especially at the minor pro level, there's not the best stability sometimes. So at the time, with a wife and an 11-year-old daughter, I knew that Kings Island wasn't going to go anywhere. So it wasn't one of those things that we would keep moving every 2 or 3 years. So it was an opportunity to come back home, do something that I had always kind of wanted to do. And, it was again, one of those things like hockey. I was fortunate enough to do it in my hometown. I was able to do what I wanted to do in the amusement theme park industry also in my hometown.
Now, this is something that I don't think a lot of people I get to interview have, but you're in the Guinness World Book of Records, and it does have to do with Kings Island. What was it about?
It does. It was riding a roller coaster, the Racer at Kings Island. It was the first roller coaster I ever rode in 1972. My cousin, I was afraid of him. And, my cousin, it was the first year the park was open, and he said, "Come on, ride me. I'll give you 50 cents. Well, that was big money for me back then, because that's what I got each week for taking out the trash and cutting the front yard of my house for my parents. So I was like, okay, 50 cents. Okay, I can buy a hot dog or something with that here. So I rode it and just absolutely loved the ride. So I ended up riding it like 9 times, that day. But 1981, I get a season pass to the park. At this time, I'm working as a novelty vendor at Reds and Bengals games. It was a fun job to have, and they went on strike in 1981. Well, the day they went on strike was the first day I used my season pass, and there was this girl that worked on the Racer I had graduated with a few weeks earlier. Her name was Diana, and I was just riding the ride a few times, and I asked her what was the one-day record, and she found out that it was 96. So I tried to get that, not knowing how the lines and stuff worked. And I would come back, and a couple of days later, I'd come back another couple of days. Well, next thing you know, I've got 400 or 500 rides on this.
Wow.
So it went from trying to get the one-day record to, well, maybe I can get 1,000 rides in before the strike ends. And I did. The strike ended on August 9th, and I got the ride on August 14th with my 1,000th ride in 1981. So it was just a fun, way to occupy my time, just having some fun. I didn't want to start and, go find another job and then have to leave, a week or two later because the strike ended. So I was just biding my time. But it was just kind of a fun thing to do. And the next year was like, well, maybe I can get 2,000 rides on it. Next year, maybe, I can get to 3,000 and 5,000. And it just kind of evolved from there. It was nothing I really planned out. It just kind of happened. And then from 1981 to 1990, I had 10,000 rides on the racer. I did end up breaking the one-day record twice. So I had 111 and 112 ride days on it. So I did what my original idea was, too, along the way. But it was just something that was, fun. I loved, the amusement theme park industry. I loved roller coasters. It was just a way to have fun. I did other things when I was up in the park too. I would ride the Beast, or I'd watch the shows and ride all the other rides too. But it was just to me, it started becoming, a perfect way to do things where I would spend, my summers and the evenings and that up at Kings Island. And then, in the winter, you're watching hockey or, then start working for hockey teams. So it was just a fun, combination there.
Important question here. Forward racer or backwards racer?
I always liked the forward side.
I like the backwards one. I don't know why, but
the backwards was unique. And I remember in '82 when the PR department at the park, they called and they said, hey, we're going to be trying this experiment thing. Can you come out Thursday for this media day thing? We're going to run one side of the racer backwards. Now, I had ridden, on the racer in the back seat, and I had turned around and, watched, from that backwards perspective. So I had an idea what it was going to be like. And it was unique and, the first, couple years with it. But for me, the novelty, had kind of worn off, 3 or 4 years into it, so I always preferred the forward side. So back in 2008, when both sides were returned to both running forward, I was okay with that because I remembered growing up with it that way. So it depends. I think when you talk to people, if they rode it from 72 to 81, they like it now that it's back to what it was. But if their first introduction to the racer was one side was backwards, they missed the backwards side.
Yeah, I think that's why I like the backwards side too. But if you think about it, two forwards, that's the racer,
Yeah, exactly with that. But no, I always had a fun time with it, and I still ride it. I don't do what I did before where I'd be riding it 20, 30, 40, 50 times in one day anymore. But if I have time, and there's friends in town and they want to take a ride on the racer, I'll still do that with them. Whatever
rides did you enjoy back then?
What other rides?
Yes.
The Beast, for sure. That to me, that's, even though the racers, the one I did the record on, and if I had to pick one ride, it's my favorite ride. The best, I would say, the Beast. To me, it's the best wooden roller coaster that's ever been built. Nothing else like it. The length of the ride, the speed of the ride for a wooden roller coaster, just being out in the woods. So I would ride that every day. I like the carousel. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of, to me, the like the heartbeat of an amusement park, is that carousel, that atmosphere kind of ride. The train, I'm a big fan of the train at Kings Island. One of the first big rides that I can remember going on, when Kings Island first opened, was that train. Here's this big, massive locomotive. So I think for a lot of little kids, it's the first ride, big ride that they go on. So, I always enjoyed the train. And then there was a ride called the Flying Eagles. You can kind of make your own experience on that. So I would ride that a lot. But there wasn't a ride that I didn't like. I would ride everything.
And this is before Paramount came in and, made everything Paramount-y.
Yeah, this was in the 1980s. From 81 to 90, I was there at least 5 days a week, sometimes 7, just around, work schedule and that, but at least 5 days a week, and I would average over 15 rides a day on the racer. And over that 10-year period, it did average out to be like 15.2 rides a day. And that was always statistically, being a sports fan, you grow up attracted to statistics.
Yeah.
So that's probably why I started keeping track. Was just I just wanted to see how many visits I'd make and how many rides I'd ride. What my average rides per day would be on each. Total rides, this ride, that ride. So being statistically inclined, that's what motivated me to keep track of all this. If I hadn't been a big sports fan, I never would even started keeping track.
I was going to ask, what was the major difference when Paramount came over and they ran the park for a while? What was the difference between Paramount and, the previous ownership?
I think that they wanted to, it was a way to market, the movies.
Yeah.
So it became more about that than, the actual park experiences, the things that were iconic to Kings Island, were getting pushed more in the background, and it was more about, what's the next movie we can, promote. So rides were being named like Top Gun and, things like that. So it was just the atmosphere, kind of changed a little bit. It became more of that feel, it was more commercialized.
Like there was Face Off, which is by the entrance to the park. There was
Face Off,
Lara Croft Experience or something like that.
Yeah, Tomb Raider was a ride. They did a good job with it. I mean, it was all well done in that. But I was used to how it was in the 70s and the 80s, and then you start to switch to where it's becoming more of these themes and that. So it just changed a little bit, for me, the atmosphere of it. But the ride experience itself was still the same.
Talking about changes from your youth in Deer Park and bouncing to Anderson Township, what's changed in the Queen City?
Just the size of it. I can remember when there wasn't a connection between, you couldn't get to Kings Island on 275, from Anderson Township. So just that kind of a thing, the Beachmont Avenue, there was one lane on each side. Tylersville Road, up by, as you get toward, Mason and Kings Island was a 2-lane road. So I think the size of it, has been what's changed a lot. That I would say just the growth. There's all these businesses now, out in Anderson Township along Beachmont Avenue, and that wasn't the case before. So it's become like a mini tri-county, through Anderson Township now.
It really has. I think the biggest change, though, and if you're a hockey fan listening to this, it's going to break your heart again. The Garden's being demolished.
Yeah. I think, that's like I said, the first hockey game I ever saw was there. I worked for the different, teams there. It would be a total of 14, years that I worked at Cincinnati Gardens. Special place in my heart, always will. Met my wife there at Cincinnati Gardens. But I've always believed, though, that you always respect history, but you can't revere it. And sometimes you have to move on, and things don't stay forever. It didn't have a tenant anymore, so it was tough for the ownership of the Gardens to keep it going. So they didn't really have much of a choice at that point. It wasn't likely to be able to attract a tenant, because what the arena is today, what everybody's looking for, it didn't have all those amenities. So it was going to be very tough to do that, or trying to bring in, different acts and things. It didn't have, the kind of things that, either the capacity or, the dressing room setup, the sounds. I mean, it just had a lot of things that weren't there, that were great in the, the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s. But what people needed today to make it work, the opportunity just wasn't there anymore. So, sad. It was very sad, to see it come down, but I understood it.
At least they did save some of the pieces. I think the stone statues they had in the building, I think that went to Xavier, and I think the letters of Cincinnati Gardens went to the Sign Museum. Yeah,
they did. So they did save some parts of it. I was a little surprised that how quickly when the ownership changed hands, that they locked it up and started just ripping things out. I thought there'd be a little more time. It would have a better kind of send off. It didn't really have a send off, that it deserved when you look at the history of it. And you had the Cincinnati Royals, and Oscar Robertson played there. Ezra Charles, was a boxer, and he was there. The Beatles played there. I mean, there was just so much history that you would have thought that it would have at least deserved some kind of a send off. But that and that didn't happen. So that was sad as well. But I did have the distinction of being the last non-employee I was the last civilian that was inside the gardens, and that wasn't by design. I went when I heard it was being sold and was changing hands. I went to go see some of the people that were still working there, and just walked around for a couple hours, and then I left. And then I got home and I had a message, Facebook Messenger that, hey, you'll be the last person that does it. The new ownership just came in and just padlocked everything. We're kicked out. So I was be considered the last person to walk the halls of gardens from a civilian point of view.
I try not to get angry about things, but it's still. I don't think the actual demolition of the gardens set me off. It's just, oh, well, everything's locked and we're going to bulldoze it for.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it should have had a send-off and it didn't.
Yeah, I don't think the NBA is coming back to Cincinnati, for a very long time, if ever. And Oscar Robertson, he was Cincinnati. And the Royals were good for a good long time, too. And there was great hockey there. The Mohawks played there. I think they won a couple of
they won 5 Turner Cup championships in a row.
I was going to say Clark Cups, and I don't know why. I think I'm thinking the Milwaukee Clarks. But, the Mohawks were good. Swords, Stingers. All the history through that building.
And the Cyclones, in the early 90s when they first came to town, that became the toughest ticket in the city to get. I worked for them. I was the 5th person they hired back in 1990, and I worked for them for 6 seasons. And those first 2 years were really special. Midway through that first season, it really took off, and all of a sudden, we were selling out every night, 10,000 plus. The next year, 32 home games, 26 of them, 10,000 plus, standing room only. So I learned a lot of what I know today about, marketing and promotions. One of the 3 original Cyclones owners, his name was Ron Fuller. He had been involved in the wrestling business, both as a wrestler and then later as a promoter. And just that guy was a genius. And just to be able to be around that for the 4 years he was involved with the franchise and the things that I learned from him, you could work, 30, 40 years in the marketing industry and not pick up what I did. Just having him every day, and I was like a sponge, just absorbing all the information. And what he did worked. We were packing the gardens, and when he left, the attendance started to go down. So he was, other people got the credit, but Ron was the promotional brains behind the Cyclones in those early years.
He got the butts in the seats for the first version of the Cyclones.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, so that was one of my jobs, was to contact the media and, throughout the week to tell them how many tickets we had left. I would say we're down to 1,500. Next day I'd call, we got 700. Next day I'd call, we got 300. And I would call game day and say, we're sold out. So that was one of my primary roles, was to give the updates to the media, how many tickets we had left during that 1991-92 season.
What's, besides the venue and the league, what's the major differences between the Cyclones back then and today's Cincinnati Cyclones, which play downtown?
Well, for the ECHL level, number one, the caliber of play. The ECHL back then was a league nobody really wanted to play in. It was a place you played if you had nowhere else to go. So the caliber of play, much, much better. You didn't see anybody that, was on an NHL contract hardly in the ECHL those first 2 years. Now there are several players on ECHL teams that, were drafted, and the NHL team, believes that they're going to play for them someday. So you definitely, the depth is much better. Back then, your second line in the ECHL probably couldn't play in the ECHL. Some of them could, but just that much difference. Just the depth in the players are different with it. I think the fans going to the game are a little bit more different. You're seeing more families now today at the Cyclones games than you did back in the early 90s at Cincinnati Gardens. It was pretty much, a college crowd was going to the game back in the early Gardens days. So now you're seeing a lot more, more families that go to the games. And then, obviously the venues are, going to be different there. You can do more things at, where the Cyclones are playing right now, with just the, you got the video scoreboard, and you can do more with the, putting on a show and more with the entertainment and those kind of things.
Now, I know the Cyclones, they have a lot of family deals, like you mentioned, and a lot of deals to get younger kids into the sport. And recently they signed a partnership with YHA. I couldn't think of the letters for a minute there, but they signed a deal where the junior Cyclones are coming back for youth hockey. What were some of the promotions like for Cyclones 1.0?
Well, the first version of it, I mean, we had, there were the bikini nights and there were, the dollar beer nights and, a lot of those, kind of promotions, the traditional ones too, the puck nights and the hat nights and the t-shirt nights. But the one thing that, if I look back that we did not do is we would have 10,000 people. It was all about entertainment with Ron Fuller, and it was working. But it was a night of entertainment. Oh, by the way, there's a hockey game going on. So one of the things that we did not do those first couple of years was we did not we weren't getting enough people hooked on actually hockey. It was the night of entertainment part of it. And I think that's what today's Cyclones do very well is they do make that effort to be working, more with the youth hockey community and developing hockey fans where, for us back then, that wasn't the priority to develop hockey fans. It was, we're entertainment, let's just do whatever we can to pack the building.
And I also like the Cyclones of today. They have special hockey teams, sled hockey teams, and they reach out a lot. And I think that's really swell.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it would be nice if you took the best of both worlds. What the Cyclones first did, and you did what the Cyclones are doing today, and then you'd really have something special.
Now, as someone that's seen a lot of hockey, especially in Cincinnati, Ohio, USA, what has changed from your first day with the microphone till today?
I think just what's changed from in the Cincinnati sense of it is just that hockey's been around now for a lot longer time, and there's more people that have been exposed to it. There's a bit more understanding about the game. One of the differences I noticed, like when I went to Albany, was on our weekly radio show, fans would call up and they'd be complaining about the power play, those kind of things, where that never happened. When I was doing the Mighty Ducks games, you didn't get the actual hockey question, questioning the strategy or anything like that. And I did in Albany, where I think now fans are more, they're getting more into that to where they're understanding the game better. It's now been here, pretty much now every year for the past 30 years. That's a pretty good run between the different versions of the Cyclones and the Mighty Ducks. So there's been enough exposure to it. So you do have that core of fan. I think that's one of the things that Cincinnati does not get credit for is there is that, core of hockey fans. There's maybe 10,000. They don't go to every game, but there's that nice solid core that you could build from if the NHL ever came here, But I think that's just the thing that there's been more development of the knowledgeable hockey fan.
Do you ever see a venue like Cincinnati Gardens being built in Cincinnati?
I don't, unfortunately, because I think the times have changed to where any venues that are being built today, it's all about the corporate community, and the luxury seats, the luxury suites, the club seats, those kind of things. And then the actual fans, you always see them in the upper levels. Of arenas. They don't get close to the ice anymore. So I think that's the one thing that's definitely changed, over the last 30 years is, if there was a new venue built or whatever, it pushes, and it works the same way, for baseball or, other sports too, where the diehard fan, they get pushed higher up in the seating around the arena because it's all about the corporate, the corporate sponsors and the club seats and those kind of things. The people that are just for a night of entertainment, they're all sitting in those seats up close.
Do you ever see something not like Cincinnati Gardens, but another hockey venue being built around Cincinnati?
I do think, I could see that. You look at the arena where the Cyclones play right now, and everybody thinks it's a younger arena because it was in comparison to the Gardens, which had been built, 1949 when that opened. But Cincinnati, the Cyclones arena, that's 45 years old. That opened late 74, 75. So it's not young. So I do think that there will come a day, in the foreseeable future where there is a new arena built and hockey will be played there.
Do you see Heritage Bank Center getting renovations, or do you see a brand new building taking its place?
I think, well, I'm going to include, if there's a new venue, that it would be a refurbished, one where the Heritage Bank Center is. I think the best option would be if you can, refurbish it, you do, because it's right there. You don't have to go acquire the land or anything. So I think that would be, the first thing that you'd want to do. That's what they're doing out in Seattle with the NHL expansion team. They're going to get, it's not a, new plot of land where they're building this arena. They're taking an old one and just, kind of redoing it to take it up to today's standards. So I think that would be the first thing that I would think would happen is it would be the current arena would be just refurbished and redone. It would have downtime, for about a year or so, 18 months or whatever, where nothing would be going on in there. But I think that would be that's the least expensive route to go, is to just refurbish what you have.
Now, in Columbus, they have the chillers around the northern quadrant of the city and location downtown. And Indianapolis has the fuel tank. I think that's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever see Cincinnati getting something like that, where they build multiple rinks for like high school hockey, youth hockey, adult hockey? Do you ever see that happening?
I do see that happening. What you need is someone to champion, and that person who wants to champion it, needs to have some deep pockets. But somebody will emerge at some point, and that will happen.
I'd love to see that happen, because the chillers in Columbus are nice, especially.
Oh yeah, they are.
The Chiller North in Lewis Center, where all the Olentangy high schools play their hockey. They just put in a third rink, and they're going to redo all their lighting systems where it's much brighter, and it's something I hope does happen in Cincinnati, because right now there's two rinks that service high school hockey, and they're both about a mile apart on 42. So, and one's in an Old Hills department store. So,
yeah, exactly. Played lots of men's league games in both of those facilities. But I think it will happen down the road. Again, you just need somebody that's going to champion that kind of a thing, that has some money, or they have people that they know that have some money to get those projects going. It always helps when, like in Columbus, we have an NHL team, because there's going to be much stronger interest in hockey. But, you look at Indianapolis, same level as the Cyclones. So, you say, why not? Why can't it happen in Cincinnati?
Exactly. It'd be the perfect place. And if the Fuel can do it in the ECHL, I think the Cyclones would be able to as well. But my next question is, going back to your hockey broadcasting career, who have been some of your favorite players and coaches and people you got to work with in that time?
Brad Shaw is a head coach. He was the head coach of Cincinnati Mighty Ducks. He's an assistant coach with the Columbus Blue Jackets right now. And I always am amazed that he does not get more opportunities to interview for a head coaching job in the NHL. I think part of that is Brad's not a self-promoter. But he's a phenomenal coach, one of the best people that I was around. So from a coaching point, there's Brad Shaw, Mike Babcock. We had the situation with him, with the Maple Leafs this past season. But at the time I was with him in Cincinnati, he always treated me and, my family very well. So, Mike's, up there on that list. Tom Rowe in Albany, an old school, guy. He was the first American to score more than 30 goals in a season in the NHL when he was with the Washington Capitals, so I enjoyed working with him. Dennis DeRosier was the first Cyclones head coach. Fun guy to be around. So those are the guys that, most memorable to me from the coaching point. From a player perspective, there's just, so many of them. There was a guy named Craig Ferguson when I was with the Carolina Monarchs, just a really, really, good guy. He got it, one of those kind of things. He understood it. Zenon Konopka with the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks. He stands out. Not the most talented guy, kind of a scrappy player. No one ever thought he'd play in the ECHL. He did. No one thought he'd be good enough to play in the American League. He did. No one thought he could play in the NHL. He did. But just from a community, point of view, he came up to me the first day of when he got assigned to Cincinnati in the 2004-05 season, and he said, "I want to, be the guy that you go to for all these community appearances. I'll do whatever you want." Now you hear that a lot, but a few of them, stay true to that all the time. But he did. And one of the funny stories about Zenon is he was going to visit Children's Hospital, so he was there. And, he took a couple players with him. And I get this call in the middle of the afternoon, and it's Children's Hospital. And they say, "We want to talk to you about the player you sent over here today, Zenon Konopka." And I'm thinking, oh, God, what'd he do? Did he use the wrong language? What happened here? What's this about? And I said, was everything okay? She goes, "Oh, yeah, everything's okay." And she said, "He was supposed to be here for an hour and a half, and he's been here for 4 hours." She goes, the kids need to settle down. He's got them all wired up and everything. They need to get back in their rooms. And but it was just things like that he made an impression on me because he did it for the right reasons. He understood, that, why other players, after practice, they didn't want to do the appearances necessarily. Maybe they wanted to go to the mall or whatever. And, his thing would always be, "Yeah, you guys go to the mall. That's not going to be there tomorrow, right? I'm going to go see these kids, who might not be there tomorrow." So he was a very positive influence on a lot of players in getting them to come see what he was doing. So that made my job much easier when you have a guy like that can take other players and kind of encourage them to do what he's doing. But we had some other players too, like John Sebastian Jaguar. He was with the Mighty Ducks when they went to the Stanley Cup final. They didn't win, but they lost in 7 games to the New Jersey Devils. But he was one of the players. Andy McDonald, Ryan Getzloff. You had Corey Pecker that played here for a little bit. He was a fun guy. Corey Perry. There was just a lot of, just so many of them that, came through. Joffrey Lupul. Michael Holmquist was a guy with the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks. Dan Bylsma was a player. His first year he came to the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks. The last year of the Ducks, he was an assistant coach. He went on to coach the Pittsburgh Penguins, led him to a Stanley Cup. He's now in Detroit as an assistant coach. Just a phenomenal guy to be around. So there's just, I could list over 100 of them.
How about some of your favorite games in your time?
Favorite game, most memorable game would have been in the 2004-05 season. Cincinnati Mighty Ducks rallied from a 3-1 deficit against Milwaukee, and the Admirals had won the Calder Cup the year before. So it's a Game 7 in Milwaukee. The Ducks skate out to a 3-0 lead. Milwaukee ties it, in the second period. They always say that, the 3-0 lead's the worst one to have in hockey. So it looks like there's going to be overtime. And with 13 seconds to go in the game, Mark Popovic, just flips one in from the blue line and just a little wrist shot, flutters toward the goal. It goes by Brian Fenley. The Ducks win the game and advance on to the next round. They eliminate Milwaukee. So that would be the most memorable game that stands out to me from the Mighty Ducks era.
Is there a game in that era where it sticks with you in the wrong way, like it's a heartbreaking loss for the Ducks?
The next round against the Chicago Wolves, they lost that series in 5 games. And just as I'm on the broadcast, talking, and you're seeing the players after they do the handshakes, they're skating off the ice, that there's not going to be another Mighty Ducks game the next year. There is no next season for the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks.
Yeah, that had to have been heartbreaking.
It was, at the time. And, you're hopeful that another team's going to, they're going to land another NHL affiliation and you're going to be able to keep it going. But it was just a special group in the 2004-05 season. And, just to watch it, you're so emotionally involved, when you're the broadcaster and you're working for the team and you're there from day one with the organization, just to see that, it's over, just like that, it's over as the guys were skating on. And I can still picture them, all going down the line and, just skating off. And I remember, Curtis Glencross scored the last Mighty Ducks goal. It was a shorthanded goal in that game. So that stands out. I think, going back to the Cyclones years, the first ever game back in 1990. It was against the Roanoke Valley Rebels, and that stood out to me because I never thought I'd see a pro hockey game, after the Swords left at Cincinnati Gardens again. So to see that come back around and be a part of it, that was a special feeling too.
Personally, for me, I have a story similar to that. It was the Dayton Demons, because I was their play-by-play voice for 3 years. The third year, we fell in the semifinal game of the best of three to the Danville Dashers, and I just have this feeling that we're not going to have Demons hockey next year. It wasn't official quite yet. I mean, there was rumors saying the owner's going to pack him up and move him to Port Huron, Michigan, which he did. But I just remember seeing that last game-winning goal with about 40-some seconds left, and I just start thinking, we're not going to have Demons hockey next year, and, all those guys aren't going to be, in Dayton. I mean, we got a team for one more year at Hara, and then they folded, Hara closed up, then that big tornado hit about a year ago. So, yeah, that's not fun when you know that there's not hockey next year.
No, and then I had another situation with the Cyclones. Like I said, I had been one of the first people that were hired in 1990, and then in the 95-96 season, as they got ready to start the playoffs, an opportunity came up with the Carolina Monarchs, and the Florida Panthers had been with the Cincinnati Cyclones as the NHL affiliate for a couple years, but they had moved on to the American Hockey League in Greensboro. A number of the players had gone there. The head coach was Rich Crom, who'd been an assistant with Cincinnati. Chuck Fletcher was the assistant GM in Florida. Got to know him real well during the Cyclones years. Brian Murray was the GM. So I was kind of excited about that opportunity, and I had an interview set up, but they said, "Well, wait till you get done with the playoffs." So Cyclones beat Kalamazoo, and then they beat them in the next round. Now they're in the conference final. So this goes from the beginning of April. We'll talk to you. So we're into the the series with Orlando, and Cyclones lost Game 7. And after that game, I just kind of sat. After everything was done with the post-game interviews and that, I just went and I sat in the seat. That I had watched my first ever hockey game there. At the Gardens and Section 20, and just kind of sat there for 20, 30 minutes because I'm thinking, okay, if I interview and get this job, this is the last time I'm going to see a game here, maybe. So that was a different, perspective too with it. But I didn't know if they were going to wait for me. I thought, 2 months later, they probably filled the job. But the next morning, I'm in my office, and Brian McKenna, who became the ECHL commissioner later on, was the general manager of the Carolina Monarchs, and he calls me and says, "Sorry about your loss last night. Can we get you on a flight here tomorrow, to come out and talk to us?" So, but that was another one of those memories, just the end for me with the Cyclones, because I had 6 wonderful years there, and knowing that, it was time to move on, to try something. I wanted to try the American Hockey League. So it was kind of one of those memories for me that I remember more about those last couple of playoff games, that series, and then that final game, than I do a lot of the 6 years with the team.
Counting hockey, what's some of your favorite things about sports in Cincinnati? I
think, for me, I like some of it's like with the Reds, it's the tradition, baseball's first team, the memories, that I had watching the Big Red Machine in the 70s. But big Bengal fan, so I've been going to their games for years. And so it's just, as a Cincinnati sports fan, I think it's just, just growing up, supporting the teams, and just having that become a big part of your life. It was, for me, it's not very deep. It's been always baseball, football, hockey, and amusement parks. There's not too much more, depth to me than that. So for me, that's what it's always kind of meant, from the Cincinnati sports scene, is just how woven into my life, the fabric of my life, that these things are.
Another thing that I don't think I'll be able to interview anyone else and ask about this, you have your very own day.
You talking about the Kings Island Day?
Yes, Don Helbig Day.
Yeah, that was, I think, back in 2004. It was my 1,000th visit as a season pass holder to Kings Island. That I had done the roller coaster thing in the 80s, and then I was approaching the 1,000 visits. The marketing department, became aware of that and said, kind of hold off. We want to kind of make a little, special deal out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So can you do it on this date? It was July 22nd. So can you hold off on visiting, as frequently as you do, so we can time it out and do it that day. So I got there that morning, they had the big red carpet out and everything that I walked down with my wife and daughter, and, they gave us a bunch of, little gifts and things, but, that was kind of fun, totally unexpected. It was one of those things that happen. If you go somewhere a lot, you're going to have numbers on something, right? So it was one of those things that, it was kind of neat. And then, 2.5 years later, I'm there, working as the PR person for the park.
Staying with Kings Island, can you ever picture like a sports exhibition ever happening at Kings Island? Like something, I don't know, like an exhibition in any sport?
That's possible to have those kind of things. We've had some things close to that. We had Robbie Knievel did a motorcycle jump. Set a world record back in 2008. That was one of my first big projects that I worked on. There, we had Nick Walenda did a high wire walk from the front of the park where the International Restaurant is over to the fountains, to the top of the Eiffel Towers. He was walking on this wire that's no wider than a nickel. 260 feet above the ground, a little nerve wracking, as you're watching that and you're the PR person for the park, knowing if something happens, how many calls you're going to get. Right. So, that's always a little nerve wracking, but, those are kind of, things like close to the sports, type things we've had some of the gaming, the gamers have come out and have had their own, event there. So there's been different things like that, but, I think there's an opportunity down the road to maybe do some kind of, sports events and things there. Now, if you go up to Sandusky with Cedar Point, they've now built a sports complex up there. So they have all kinds of, there's baseball tournaments, softball tournaments, basketball tournaments, so they've got a great setup. And, anytime anybody that, that's listening to this podcast, if you're up in that Sandusky area, check out the sports center that has been built up there by Cedar Point. It's fantastic. I don't know that there's a better facility anywhere that someone's going to find for youth sports. You can talk about, what's down at, Disney, when they have all their tournaments and things down there at the sports complex down there. But this is, first class. I think it's just a phenomenal facility, and it's only been open for a little over a year now.
I think that'd be pretty huge at Kings Island. I mean,
it would be, yes.
There's already great sports in Southwest Ohio, and you got that tennis venue that's home to the state championships, fall and spring. I mean, I think it'd work in Kings Island.
Yeah, it'd be great to have all those things. You look at it now, when Kings Island opened in the 70s, the golf course across the street was owned by Kings Island. The tennis facility owned by Kings Island. They had their own campground. They had their own hotel. So it was a complete, both sides of the street, was all, owned by Kings Island. And as years went on, the Paramount Group and that, sold a lot of that off. But yeah, it'd be nice to have a lot of these different things happening. And, if you had a place where the sports teams could play in that, that the kids are certainly going to want to go, spend some time at Kings Island, either before their game or after their game.
Don, how has this coronavirus affected your jobs?
Well, been working at home, since the, late March. With it, I'm still able to do a lot of the things that I would have done in the office. It's just a different way of doing it. But now we're in that point to where the season, we would have been open. So, we're no different than, what the Reds, are going through, all the baseball fans. And, it's tough for everybody. It's throughout the country, everybody's going through it. And there's no playbook for this. There's no playbook. So, it changes day by day. There's no way you can come out and say this is when, you're going to open or anything like that, because you don't know. With that. So just a lot of unknowns. I think that's been the biggest thing is just all the unknowns. But, you still proceed and try to go about it, the best you can. And one of the things that, I've been doing, like with the Kings Island blog, is there's a lot of, just keeping people entertained with virtual rides and park history, So we've been able to keep our audience engaged, with that. But, you certainly wish it was different. But the reality of the situation is it's not. So you just adapt and try to take it the best you can day by day. And then there will come a point, the park will open again and everybody will get back to having fun. And, there'll be that new normal, for a little while. And then, eventually it all comes back. And then, hopefully everything comes back stronger than ever.
I'm hoping. But I will make a comment about what Kings Island did for season ticket holders. Free season tickets for 2021 if you already have your 2020 pass in. So I think that was really nice for Kings Island to do.
Yeah, that was, a nice gesture. I think, when it first started, nobody knew how long it would, go. We knew for sure, that it was, that first couple weekends. But as you get into, the end of April and there's still no sign of anything, it's the right thing to do, is to give your pass holders, a lot of them have been pass holders, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, some of them. So it's the right way to, reward them for their loyalty, during this difficult time.
Don, you mentioned a lot of hockey, and you also mentioned there was an indoor football team in Albany when you were with the
the Rainer football,
the River Rats. Is there any other sport that you want to try broadcasting before you hang up the set?
No, I think baseball would have been fun. I would have liked to have done baseball. That would have been that third sport. So growing up, it was either hockey was the priority, then baseball would have been second, and then football would have been the third one to broadcast. So never got the chance to do baseball. But I can't complain when I look back on it. When I'm 19 years old and I'm thinking I want to either be a broadcaster or I want to work in the amusement theme park industry. A few years later when I discovered that part of it, I got to do both, and so I can't complain. I can say without hesitation, over the last 30 years, no one's had more fun than I have.
For those folks that are listening, if they want to be in the PR field or the broadcasting field, what advice can you give?
Well, I think if you want to do the PR thing, that I would, it's kind of changed. It's evolved on how, PR is done nowadays. There's not really the need to do press releases. You can do so much of that now through social media. You don't have to beg the media. Mm-hmm. You can become the media yourself, with the days of the Dayton Daily News and the Enquirer, that used to be the printing press. The printing press today is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's your own blogs, using your own website, driving traffic there. So I would say if you're trying to get into PR, focus on the digital side of it. Learn as much as you can about the social media piece of it, because that's now kind of where a lot of that communication is going out. So really become as well versed as you can and all those different platforms, and also learn how to do things with a blog and what you're trying to do with that in terms of becoming the media yourself. If you want to be a broadcaster, you just have to. It's a tough industry to get into, but if you stay with it, that's the key part. You just got to stick with it. That it can't happen for you. There's a lot of you'll see a lot of broadcasters that are pretty well known today. They spent 10, 15 years, really trying to break in before they finally do. The Reds' new broadcaster this year that's replacing Marty Brenneman, Tommy Thrall, he spent a long time, in the single A, double A level before he ever got the shot, to start doing some Reds games. So you just got to stick with it, if you want to be a broadcaster, and try to broadcast as many things as you can. Don't turn down any opportunities. If there's an opportunity to do some high school sports, do it. If there's an opportunity to do, some college sports, do it. That's the thing. You just need that repetition to be calling games. At the end of the day, if it's a high school game, a college game, or the NFL, it's still football, right? Or it's still baseball.
Exactly.
So you're still calling the same game. It's just at different levels.
Now, the next two questions I have for you are based on here's unlimited money. We'll stick with the sports side first. If I gave you all the money in the world to build a hockey rink in Cincinnati, where exactly are you building this? What do you have included, and why?
Where am I going to build it? That is a phenomenal question. With that, I would think For Cincinnati, I would go somewhere down, what they were looking to do before with the Reds, down Broadway Commons area. There was some space down there, where you have like Mount Adams in the background, in that area. I would do it down there for an arena, to put it there in Cincinnati.
Okay.
And I think I would want it to be, I would some of the best, take the best from some of the, the NHL arenas out there today. Nashville, I'd go to Columbus. I'd look and see, the Florida Panthers have a tremendous arena, so go to those places and just pull the best elements from those and put it into your design.
Now, I give you the same amount of money for your very own ride at Kings Island. It could be roller coaster, it could be anything. What are you building and why?
I think, we've, we're going to be able to debut that right here soon with the new Orion roller coaster. I think that's what I would do, with that kind of a ride. I think it's something that it's got the height where you're going to drop 300 feet. It's got the speed, 91 miles an hour. It's got the length over 5,100 feet. It's got lots of, hills. So something like that is what I would do. I think my big thing is, I'm big on rides that are repeatable. So the bigger and the more intense you make it, the less people that are going to want to ride it repeatedly. You want somebody that gets off the ride, they want to get back in line and ride it again. So I think, anyone that would go to Kings Island when it does open and they ride Orion, that's the kind of ride that I would build.
I think I said this before we started the interview, but Chick Lugwood says hi, and he also wants to ride the Orion with you.
We'll make that happen for Chick. We'll make that happen.
He also wants to be the voice of the haunted house too, but
he would be phenomenal with that. He really would. Chick's a great guy. I got to know him. When he was covering the Bengals for the Dayton Daily News, and I always appreciated him. And I would be in the post game press conference, and he'd ask the questions that a lot of others might not ask. He wasn't afraid, to ask the harder questions.
Although, if you do need a second voice for the haunted hotel, I can do a good spooky one. But,
yeah, you could fit right in with that. Yeah.
Now, how can people follow your work and you on social media?
Well, if they want to follow me, the best way to do it would be Twitter, and it's just simply Don Helbig. Don, D-O-N, and then Helbig at twitter.com. That would be the best way to follow me on social media. I'm also on Instagram. I don't do a lot of the crazy things, not doing TikTok or anything like that where I'm going to entertain people that way. And then the other way to follow me is go to the Kings Island blog. I usually put out 4 or 5 different blogs a week, try to cover the park as the media would. So if you go to the Kings Island website at visitkingsisland.com, just check out the blog, and you can also see my Twitter address right there too as well. But those are the best ways to follow me.
Don, I really appreciate the time you've given me today, and I miss working with you with the hockey team. But
yeah, that was a fun time.
Yeah,
it was a fun time, and it really was. I mean, for me, it was an opportunity. I hadn't done games for 8 or 9, 10 years, and had a chance to come back and do some Thunder games, and it was a way to stay in touch with hockey, but also get to meet other really good people such as yourself.
I mean, it's something I didn't really get to touch up on during this interview. Just the Thunder, just how much the sport itself is the same, but how different is juniors from the pros?
When I first started to do the games, it was tough because the speed of the game was a lot, not as fast. The plays, you didn't have the crisp passes. It was the caliber of play really did. I mean, I'll say that it did surprise me. And it was better than I thought it would. But it took a little bit of time to get used to, because when you're doing the American League and that, you can kind of read the play, what's going to happen. And and from watching practices and stuff, what the guys are going to look to do, the tendencies. You do 80 games a year, especially your own team, what these guys tend to do in every situation, and that helps you call the game because you can you can forecast what's about to happen here, and you stay on top of the play that way. So it took a little bit of time to get to know the different players on the Thunder and what their tendencies were. But once that came about, then it was a lot easier to call the games. But it was just a different, it was an adjustment to go from, the speed of the game, and then just some of the, there was a lot of, I'll call it like ping pong, a lot of, just throwing it from each other's blue line back and forth a little bit stuff. So it was a little bit of that to get used to. And then you just learn, I learned that, not to try to catch every little, thing that was happening. So it would sound a little bit better coming out to the audience, so it wasn't as much, different possession of the puck, as you had at that level.
And that was a lot of fun too, because the Thunder was pretty good, and that was
they were coming on. They were coming on.
That was a tough conference too. I mean, you had the Peoria Mustangs; they were really good. You had the St. Louis Junior Blues, which would have been the team to beat. Nashville Junior Predators had a team. I think they were in the same conference.
Yeah, Nashville. Yeah, and the Nashville Junior Predators, one of their coaches was Chris Mason, who had played for the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks, and then had gone on to play, about 9-10 years in the National Hockey League, with Nashville being one of the teams he played for. So it was fun to catch up with him again too. David Carpa, he was coaching the Peoria team, and he played for the Cincinnati Cyclones when I was there. So there were some familiar faces in the league, so recognizable coaches, but it was a good league. And the Thunder, they were at that disadvantage because they got the later start in some of these other programs, but they were coming on, and they were pretty competitive. That last year they played at the Gardens, and then they moved up to the place up in Dayton.
Yeah, and that's how we got to work together too. So it was a lot of fun watching them. They had some really good players. Jake Oostorff, I think, is a name I remember.
Yep. Another adjustment was when we went up to Dayton was not having that that sideline view, but having it from the end zone, trying to call the game that way. Yeah. Because you're used to staying in the far corner, near corner, that kind of thing. And then now all of a sudden you're like, well, it's
left corner, right corner.
Right corner. Yeah. So it was a different terminology to try to throw in there for a little bit, doing it from that angle. And when it was at the other end, you couldn't always see when a goal was scored, as well. Or if there was a scramble or something, you couldn't really tell who was getting it from the far end. So it was a little bit more guesswork, at that point too. So that was an adjustment, but it was also good because I'd never had to do it that way. So it was fun to call a game from, a different perspective. It was just totally new experience. So that was all right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little tough, like you mentioned, if it's happening on the far end, and there's a lot of bodies, it's tough to see. And I deal with that for high school hockey up at South Metro, but at the same time, it gives you more of an advantage because you see it, not quite 360, but you have more ways to catch it, type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I do miss calling games, and I look forward to the Thunder games. I think I did whatever it was, 15 games, and you would do 15 games, but it was a way to stay in touch with hockey, and they had a nice group of people that were involved with that organization. I know Ryan, the head coach, Ryan Colville, he's now, in Calgary in the Western Hockey League as an assistant coach. Dwayne Sutter, former New York Islander, he's the head coach of that team. So, he's moved on and having some good success coaching in the Western Hockey League, and that's going to help him. And eventually, he'll get to be coaching a junior A team in that league at some point, you would think.
Do you follow high school hockey in the area?
A little bit, I see it pop up sometimes, from different people involved with it in my social feeds and that. But, as far as going to games and that, I haven't really had much of an opportunity to get out and watch any.
I mean, there's some really good high school teams too. I mean, Moeller is probably one of the better ones. St. X is up there. Elder, they were really good when I started calling high school hockey, which thanks to the Thunder, that's how I got in with Centerville and Springboro. So that was really.
I would see it. I would see high school games. When I was working for the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks, because they would have on Saturdays. You would see the high school teams, or on Sundays. At the Gardens, they'd be playing before the Mighty Ducks games or after the Mighty Ducks games. So I was able to watch, the Moelers and the Sycamores and Elders and that there, and they would have practices there. So I would see that, in the late afternoons every day. But that, once the Mighty Ducks left, I wasn't around it. I didn't have that access, to it that today that I had back then.
I understand. And I think my big worry about the Gardens closing was what's going to happen to all the high school teams. And luckily, they all found homes with Northland or Sports Plus. So, luckily,
yeah, but there definitely needs to be those arenas that we talked about earlier in the podcast here. There definitely needs to be more ice.
If anyone's listening and has deep pockets, start building rinks, because that'd be great. And build rinks with like I don't know if you're going to know what I'm talking about, but the desk at the USA rink at Sports Plus, it's like the broadcast desk. That's awesome. It's got like the fastest internet you can ever imagine. It's just streaming there. It's just beautiful. Now on the other side, the Canadian side, they don't have a desk, which is fine, but you set up between one of the benches and sin bin. They put one of those stickers on, it's like, this is how you protect your neutral zone. It's like, why would you put it on the glass? That's how I see the game from there. Oh, that was not fun. I had to lean over the glass with the camera and everything. Luckily, I didn't get struck.
But the good thing, though, is, you're still calling games, and that's what matters.
Yeah, and I'm very thankful for that, and it seems like people really do appreciate, someone covering ice hockey. So, if you ever catch a high school game and, it's Centerville playing, look me up because I'll probably be there.
Definitely do that.
Don, thank you so much for your time today, and that concludes episode 149 of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. Up next, the milestone 150. Hey folks, just a couple things to talk about before we wrap up episode 149. As you heard, to close out the interview, the 150th episode is next, and I'm really excited for it. I do have a plan for it. Hopefully I get an interview done that's very near and dear to the podcast. If not, I do have another topic in mind, so no worries there. What I'd like for you, the listener, is some interactions. Any special questions for Mowen's mailbag? They could be sports related. They could be local area related. I'll answer anything for Mowen's mailbag in episode 150. And a little bit of a celebration of this podcast, because I am really proud of what I've done the past few weeks with all the interviews and everything. I'm really proud of them. And I hope that you've enjoyed listening to them. Again, episode 150, that will be coming up next. And again, I do have a topic one way or another. So send in questions for Mowen's mailbag, suggestions on celebrations, but episode 150 will be next. This has been episode 149, and this is Lee W. Mowen signing off for this episode.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mowen. To subscribe to the podcast, please visit theleewmowen.com/podcast. From there, you can choose your favorite platform, such as Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, TuneIn, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, and many more. Interact with the podcast and host on Twitter at the Lee W. Mowen and at CindayPod. Like the Facebook page, the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, and download the free Flick Chat app, then search for the local Cinday Sports Group to submit your future Mowen's mailbag questions. The closing theme is Lights Go Down by Dan Helbig, provided by the YouTube Music Library Collection. This is Lee W. Mowen, and I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please join me again next week on the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast.